Hey, Ashley, I hope you agree to being recorded.
I guess I have to. Good morning.
Good morning. We want everyone to be aware that this meeting is being recorded, and we'll make sure that anyone who joins us a bit later understands that, yes, this meeting is being recorded. Don't say anything, don't appear on camera in a way that you wouldn't want publicly available.
Good morning and welcome to another Q&A Insiders session. I'm excited to catch up with you. We've been ships in the night with all that's going on with you, and I'm excited to hear what's new and just talk about the industry.
Oh, let's talk about the industry. This week has been pretty busy legislatively, so that's been one of the primary focuses of my attention this week.
As well, which is pretty fun because I get to observe everything from an outsider's perspective and see all the moves that you're making.
Well, it's the moves that you don't see that are most impactful.
Well, if we could get into that, I would love to. But I know that we've focused quite a bit on SB 803 on the podcast in the past couple of weeks, and we're going to be talking about it again on Monday's episode. Hopefully, that will be widely shared because of Memorial Day, and everybody will get to hear a little bit more about how the last two episodes of our podcast have been a little bit like predicting the future.
It's like deja vu all over again in terms of us predicting the future.
Totally by accident, but consider the source coming out when it did, as we saw all of the different positions taken by different members of our industry on SB 803 and the tactics that are being used, which I think it's just very interesting sociologically.
Sources and methods, Ashley. Sources and methods.
So let's get into it.
We're not going to reveal all of them, but we do have a certain number of public events that have happened recently. One being a state board meeting that was focused strictly on SB 803. That was the only item on the agenda. And it was the first time that we really heard the board discuss these topics in detail based on the recent update to the legislation itself. So, this is where we got to discuss in more depth the issue of the deregulation of haircutting. And for anyone who thinks, well, this is California, what does it matter? Believe me, it matters. Every state is watching what's going to happen here in California because, as we've said before, if this were to pass, this would be the biggest step towards deregulating our industry because of haircutting being included as it's written right now.
We've said many times before, as goes California, so goes the rest of the country. And I think if this big domino were to fall with regard to haircutting, it would open the floodgates. So it's so important to stay on top of this, even if you're not in California.
Right. And so that meeting was held earlier this week and it was recorded. You could have watched it, you could have listened in. It'll be available on YouTube on the Department of Consumer Affairs channel, and we'll be linking to that in the show notes for Monday's episode. So if anyone really wants to go back and watch it, they can. I thought the whole meeting was interesting from the introduction of the legislation, which was actually made by Sarah Mason, Ashley. The Senate staffer was on the call and was the one introducing the bill. So the way that she was describing it might contradict the way that we would summarize the bill. But of course, they have to
Oh,
review it. What was that?
I think so. I think
Yeah.
we would differ.
Right. And it's not so much that she gave justifications for it, nor was she, to my knowledge, asked questions and asked to explain anything. So it was more that she gave a brief summary in the beginning, explained that it was the result of a long process, Ashley. What do you know? The Sunset Review process. And then
Okay.
afterwards, she the meeting then turned over to Christy Underwood, our executive officer, and she went through section by section of the legislation to describe what it was that was being written in there and how it would impact the board.
back and rewatch that because I did not get to attend live, and I think that I think anything straight from a horse's mouth is a good thing. Just based on what we discussed when we recorded next week's episode, is you have to, if you're going to have an argument or you're going to try to figure out differing positions, you kind of have to agree that you're speaking about the same thing before you start. And it seems like this has been sort of a tactic just in life in general, in politics and whatever. It's like we can't even agree on the base level fact before we start throwing out our opinions and making accusations and things like that, just as a society. And so I really want to know where this committee is coming from on SB 803 and what they're hoping this legislation will accomplish, so that we can then come at it with facts and figures and talk about the potential damage to the industry, but then also talk about the positives and what great things this bill can do for aesthetics, especially.
Unlike other board meetings, the board members in this meeting were very vocal. So you could hear them exchanging opinions, and you could hear that not all of them would agree on certain things. In fact, there's one board member that thinks we should keep one board member in particular who thinks we should keep the practical exam. Now, that person happens to be a public member and not a member of our industry, but he's always come back and said we need the practical exam. Which is not an argument that I buy when he goes on to explain it. But again, it's interesting to hear the interaction. And I will say that we do have a new board member. That person is a industry member, happens to be a cosmetologist and establishment owner. Her name is Tanya Fairley. And then there was another board member who is an industry member who is absent, and that was Christy Tran, the licensed manicurist. She wasn't even at the meeting.
Good morning.
Good morning, Rachel.
Good morning.
We're talking about our exciting week in regards to SB 803 and the board meeting. And then, of course, it's, moving through the Senate, and we'll be with the Assembly soon. But it was really interesting to listen to the board debate the merits of SB 803, and they came back with a support with amendments position, as I expected they would. Mm-hmm. And we'll see what they come back with in terms of actual amendments. Like when that gets written out and brought back to the Senate Business and Professions Committee, then we'll see what that looks like. I have a strong indication of what it will look like.
It was an interesting bill to read, for sure. Like, mm-hmm. It's I don't want to say it's a mess, but it's definitely like, it's definitely legible, but it's a little bit, difficult to understand. I mean, I, for one, fully support eliminating the practical exam, especially with what, potential licensees went through in California this year. I have a couple of friends that finished their hours and finished their school right around the time COVID started, and have just now been able to get in to take their practical. So I don't know. It seems like, from what I'm reading on it, it seems like they're trying to make the industry more equitable, but maybe going about it in the wrong way. Like they're wanting to remove, I want to say, barriers that allow people that are kind of operating in a way to continue to operate that way. But I don't know if that's necessarily the best solution. So I'm interested to see what they kind of come back with, because it kind of seems like a lot of the decisions that they were making were geared a little bit more towards things that I've seen a lot in the entertainment industry, where it's like, celebrity kind of stuff, like hairstyling versus hair, hairstyling versus hair cutting or hair coloring, like just basic things like that. What was concerning to me when I read the bill, and I'm not sure if they talked about this yesterday, I had a crazy day in the studio, but it didn't seem like haircutting was even in the allocation of how you're spending time learning hair in school. I didn't see that in there. Did I miss it, or?
Well, if they take it out of the scope of practice, then you could make the argument that you don't need to teach it at all as part of the curriculum, right? So that's one of the discussions we'll be having, is that if you were to deregulate a certain thing, like if you were to take styling out of cosmetology and say, guess what? You don't need to be licensed to style hair. Does that mean then you wouldn't learn styling at all in school? Or do you have this sort of two-tiered system where you have people who are actually trained and licensed, and part of their license covers styling? It's something that they learned in school and they learned to do well, versus people who can do it legally but never went to school for it and don't have a license because now the law says you don't need one. So we're not sure what it is.
Yeah. I suspect that they'll do something similar to the nail school that I went to, where it's like you'll just learn the practical exam for the low cost price, and then for the higher advanced price, then you'll learn how to do gel, then you'll learn how to do the things that you actually need to learn how to do to function in the career that you're doing. And I also have a concern with how it deregulates education, in the sense of like, we already kind of have a superfluous amount of educators that have no business educating. So I think when you also take that out of the mix, then how do you even figure out who should be teaching things?
We haven't
and how
had
do you
licensing.
regulate that?
Yeah, we haven't had licensing for instructors for some time. So there is no instructor license or instructor certificate.
Really?
Anyone can teach at a beauty school. Now, if you were at a community college, the community college has its own qualifications that are necessary to teach there. But as far as beauty schools, and I love how you said nail school, because there are no nail schools in California. You have to be a full cosmetology school and offer nails. There are barbering schools, but that just may be the remnant of the fact that there used to be a barbering board and a cosmetology board, and then they got merged together in 1992. I went back and I looked at some of the arguments that were being stated for that merger. Guess who was against the merger between barbers and cosmetologists?
Cosmetologists.
No, barbers. And you know why? Because they felt their standards were higher than the Cosmos. No, I'm serious. I have the documentation. Barbers, the barber board was called the Board of Barber Examiners. It wasn't called the Board of Barbers or the Board of Barbering. It was the Board of Barber Examiners. And their fear was that the cosmetologists didn't have a high enough standard and they didn't do enough inspections.
Well, that's kind of in line with what's happening around the conversation of SB 803 and the side that the barbers are taking, or the more vocal barbers are taking.
Yes.
I'm just sitting back shaking my head because we have licensed instructors. We have nail only schools in Illinois, but the instructor exam has absolutely nothing to do with proving that you have a mastery of your field. It is all about teaching styles, learning the differences between types of instruction, things like that. So you have to be a licensed practitioner of whatever, you just have to hold a license, I believe. And so they kind of assume you know what you're talking about when it comes to having passed the state board for whatever your discipline is. But then you just have to have your instructor license as well. But how that's enforced, based on who taught at my nail school, my guess is gently. It is gently enforced.
Well, what was common at my school that I went to, Jamie knows, what was common at my school is they would actually pull students and then have them go through the cosmetology program and then just have them go straight from being students to being instructors.
That is helpful.
Why am I not surprised?
I mean,
actually, the Illinois law here about so the sections referring to licensed instructors, this is set to be repealed January 1, 2026. So I'm assuming this is just a baked in sunset review for us. But let's say licensed cosmetology teacher means an individual license by the department to practice cosmetology, aesthetics, hair braiding, and nail technology as defined in this act, and to provide instruction in the theory and practice of cosmetology, aesthetics, hair braiding, and nail technology to students in an approved cosmetology, aesthetics, hair braiding, or nail technology school. So that's more, I hadn't reviewed that language in a long time, and that's more specific than I thought it was going to be.
Well, you know what's funny? I have been reviewing the language in the Barbering and Cosmetology Act like I have never reviewed it before. And I think one of the disadvantages that we have when we do get new legislation, and Rachel, you're experiencing this, I'm sure, is that you're looking at this stuff and you're like, okay, wait a second. Okay, how is this new? How does it compare to what was there before? Do I even understand what was there before? And that's where, if you spend a lot of time with the original document, you will become so enraged, I imagine, because you want it to make sense. You want it to like flow from one subject to the next and to be organized in a way that makes sense. But I really do think, and I've never looked at what the barbering rules were and the cosmetology rules were right before they got smashed together in this unholy alliance. But I mean, it does make sense that we're all regulated by the same board. I'm not saying that, but no one like went through both documents and then created a new document that merged like the best of both into one even better. So that is really, really enlightening to have that experience, to go through that document and see these things and realize that, for example, one of my bigger pet peeves now is, why are we giving apprentices licenses? Apprentices should have a permit, not a license. It should be a permit that gives them permission to provide services under an approved apprentice program and at a salon establishment that's part of that apprentice program and all of those things, because apprentices do get paid to get those hours, sort of the earn as you learn method, which I think is ridiculous, because that's going to be, this is another thing that came out in the meeting, that will stay at 3,200 hours, even if the schools reduce the hours down to 1,000. So even if there's a reduction in hours, the apprentice program for cosmetology will still be at 3,200, and that's because that's where it's set by the Apprentice Standards Agency. And I was told that, because I asked the question, I said, is it just because it's 1,600 times 2? And they said, no, that's not how they got to 3,200. I'm like, well, that's how I get to 3,200. So I'm not sure where 3,200 hours comes from any more than I can tell you where 1,600 hours came from.
I was curious though, because I know when they cut down the hours for cosmetology, I know that they had cut down the hours required for nails. I mean, obviously that's what I noticed because that's what I do. So it's like interesting to see like where they trimmed, but then they kept the nail program at 400 hours.
They will never cut the nail program. In fact, a couple of years ago, they actually tried to increase it to, I believe it was 5. Yeah, it was either 500 or 600. And I fought that tooth and nail because, spending more time doing nothing doesn't improve health and safety at all. And understand that one of the outcomes of the meeting was that the board was going to go back to the committee with specific recommendations for the curriculum, because that is one area where the committee has no business telling the board how many hours should be spent teaching one subject over another, because they don't understand how things are done in beauty school. None of those people have any experience spending time the way that we did in a beauty school.
Which arguably was a complete waste of time.
Exactly. And that's what we're talking about when it comes to, everybody wants to freak out about a reduction in hours and call it a backslide. But how much of that time is just really preparing for something like the practical exam, like you stated, which is just, I mean, I've never had a practical exam. I can't even imagine what that's like. And I know that it's
my first one.
Right. And it's
because
just like,
I put my trash can, like when you were talking on the thing and you said a choreographed dance routine, you go in, you're so nervous. You don't know who you're going to get. The first portion of this practical exam, if you don't get a good score on that, you're not passing. It's worth something like, it's like 25 points out of 50 points or something like that. It's a huge portion. It's like that and the Bloodborne thing. But I had put my trash can on the wrong side of my table. And when I was handing my hand, like putting my hand on the table with the red nail polish to hand to my proctor, it fell face down. Like I dropped it as I was setting it down.
I don't mean to laugh, Rachel. I don't mean to laugh, but have you and Wendy compared practical exam stories?
Oh no, Wendy, but I'm sure it's so I almost got 100% on the written.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
I don't mean to
Like-
laugh, but Wendy's mannequin head fell off and she and she failed her practical because her mannequin head fell on the floor. If you and Wendy got together, I'm being serious here, Rachel. I'm being dead serious. I want you two to get together and record a TikTok or something about how ridiculous your practical exam experience was and how you failed. And I'm not talking out of school. Wendy has repeated this
yeah.
story often. It would be hilarious because it
I mean,
shows how stupid it is.
I mean, like, it was just insane because, like the things you don't think about that you go in and totally throw you off, like the desks are all along the wall. So when you're in school, you practice everything, with all of your things. Coral, stop it. Coral, knock it off. You practice discipline time.
Got it. I love it.
Like you practice everything with some things on the right hand side, and then you get to the thing, and you might get seated at a chair that has everything on the left hand side. So all of a sudden, you're
Unreal.
just thrown
That's
for a loop,
unbelievably
and
bad.
It's insane to me, and it was so embarrassing for so long. Now I just laugh about it because I'm just like, the proof is in the pudding. Like, I have a successful private studio, but it's completely wild to me. Like the practical exam has nothing to do with,
Right. It's
like
wild.
you said, Jamie. It's like
wild.
just watch people freaking disinfect their tools.
Yeah. Yeah. Which I find that worthwhile that somebody actually learns the way the state, requires. It's something I learned in managing people. You have to inspect what you expect when it comes to, here's the standard I expect you to maintain. But I thought my exam experience was intimidating. I was in a locked room by myself with 8 separate cameras on me, taking my practical exam, which is a multiple choice test, just on like a old Tandy computer. And it's got, there's a proctor on video watching you. There's a camera above you. And then there's like 3 or 4 cameras like under and the side. They really don't want you to cheat. And up until that point, it was an exam only administered in English. And, click, click, click. It's like, I want to say 60 questions. And it took me 20 minutes or whatever. And then I had to like bang on the door to be let out. I had to take it at this insane like Health and Human Services building.
I was going to say, it sounded like did you take an exam or were you being retained by TSA?
It was very similar because like you can't bring anything in with you, obviously. And so you have to like lock your stuff up or not bring it. And the woman could not care less about any of the things that were happening in that building. And so I go in the room and I'm like, hello. But you find out right away if you pass, which is great. But Lordy, what a dumb, I understand that it's serious and that you have to take it seriously. But if I had to like flop around a mannequin hand somewhere, I don't know how I would have handled that. Literally.
It's truly ridiculous. Like,
I think it'll
don't
be
know
gone.
how to describe it.
I think it'll be gone. I actually think that's so far over the edge. And I know for a fact that our executive officer wants it gone. There was a meeting on Monday that was meant to be a school forum for beauty school instructors, owners, students to phone in and ask questions about the practical because there have been some changes to it. And I just wanted to scream at them like, this is so stupid. It was horrible, but it didn't get recorded. If it had been recorded, I think it would have been excellent evidence on why we need to get rid of the practical. It was so bad. People were asking repeatedly about using acetone to like dissolve the sculptured nail or something. I don't even know what they're doing because I took my test almost 30 years ago and we used live models then. And now, of course, we realize there are no live models anymore at the practical exam. But I think that's one that's too far gone, and I'm grateful for it, that that's not going to be looked at anymore. And then the issue of the hours during the meeting, it some of the members of the board wanted to like figure it out right then and there. Like, well, how many hours should it be? It's like as part of this board meeting that was supposed to end at noon, and they hadn't even taken any public comment yet, which I found ridiculous. And I will go on record and say right now, this is ridiculous because some of you people were the same people who were in those meetings where it was the 1,600-hour curriculum task force. You had ample opportunity to come back with an actual curriculum, and now you want to do it in 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Dumb. Just dumb. And I don't blame the new board president for that, because he really did let his board members talk. And the executive officer, I don't blame her for that, because she's not the one leading the meeting. But it just goes to show how I think this is payback. This is payback for not reducing the hours when you've been asked to repeatedly, and for not taking more seriously this whole issue of barriers to entry.
Yeah. Yeah, we've been asked how many times, and shown through consistent attempts at deregulation in other states that this is all they're talking about is barriers to entry, barriers to entry. And so if we don't design it ourselves, they're going to do it for us. And this is what we get now. We can't, something you and I have talked about several times, is we are not very good at admitting our weaknesses. And the response to this bill showing how there's so many camps that are all or nothing with this, just show the attitude when it comes to doing any kind of amendment to the current law. Because everybody is trying to maintain the status quo despite just knowing and seeing how broken it is. It's totally, totally broken.
In related news, the AB 1561 bill, which would extend the sunset for manicurists to be able to work as independent contractors in booth rent, has moved on, and that is an extension of 2 years. So it's not everything I had hoped for. It's not AB 231, where the sunset would have been struck completely and manicurists would not have had to worry about ever losing their right to booth rent and work as independents. But another 2 years gives us another 2 years to figure out exactly what it is the legislature thinks is wrong with the industry, and what they can do and what we can do to remedy that.
It's just wild to me that no one's solution has been to send someone from the Department of Labor to talk to cosmetology students. Like, it's just wild to me that one of the requested solutions, I mean, and obviously it's like, these are all completely different departments, bureaucracies or whatever, but like, it's like wild to me that the solution's never been to empower the people that are being trained to know what the actual rules and regulations are when it comes to what is and isn't a misclassified employee. I mean, we have states that have you take, is someone a sex traffic victim, things like that. It's just kind of wild to me that that's not included in any part of like the process.
Rachel, when did you go to school? What year?
2019.
Okay, so here's the deal. There is a health and safety curriculum that was in place that comes from the board that has workers' rights in it. So you should have received that information while you were in school.
Are you surprised?
Okay, Rachel, you and I are going to have to talk, and you are going to have to document a lot of your experience, because I think, and because your experience was so recent, I think it points to a lot of the shortcomings of the fact that the board does not have sole oversight of the schools. They control the curriculum, but what Christy explained, the executive officer, she explained that when schools go to get approval from the agency that does oversee schools, all they do is take a photocopy of the curriculum right out of the law and send it in and say, oh, here's our curriculum. That's what they do, and they get approved. And I see Ashley mouthing, wow.
Well, that's the agency that I had, what is it? The Bureau of Private Post-Secondary that approves that, right?
Well,
in California, I think.
BBC approves their curriculum. So the BBC is forced to approve that shoddy practice of just photocopying when they should be asking for a lot more. And so I know that you have lots of experiences that intersect with other issues that I have that we will not go into today. But I think the fact that we did get this extension and we have people looking at this issue of labor and misclassification in our industry, maybe finally we can shine a light and have someone look at it, not just for one little segment of the industry, but for the larger industry.
And it happens everywhere. It's not just, I think that people have this view that it's only males. And I think a lot of it's because they all think that it's like Vietnamese women being forced to work against their will. So it's like there's a little bit of like a savior complex, I think, involved in how people feel about the nail industry in particular. But truthfully, like I don't know. I posted a story on Instagram the other day just talking about what, what, like, you're either this or you're in California, you're either an employee and you get an hourly wage and maybe you get commission on top of that and you're on payroll, or you are a complete sole proprietor, regardless. And I was like, there's no in between. And I'll tell you what, every single person that reached out to me and told me that they're stuck in a situation like that was coming from a nice salon. It was not from Elite Nails 99 down the street. Like,
yeah. Well, what I would like to see is a joint task force between the Department of Labor and the board. But I also would like to remove the onus from the victims of labor exploitation and have that coupled with increased inspections, because it's this weird, as Jamie and I had discussed when we spoke with Gracie J, it's this weird gray area between the Board of Cosmetology and the Department of Labor that it's like they can kind of just get in between, because the Venn diagram is just two circles right now. There is no kind of cross-pollination between these two agencies when it comes to misclassification, especially. And so there's all this human trafficking and labor exploitation stuff coming out that, to your point, I think, which is very well made, it is very much about like, oh, save these women, as opposed to save your neighbor who is currently making commission only.
Who's getting hit with a $10,000 tax bill.
Right.
Because
they had absolutely no idea
in a pandemic. Like, it's just completely insane to me that after the year that California's had, that salon owners aren't minding their P's and Q's a little bit more. Like, just the
way it's always been done, Rachel. I mean, you've always made a 50% commission and had to clean towels and answer phones. But when you don't have a client, you're not making anything. And that was my first, I mean, that's how I lasted 2 weeks in a salon when I first started, because I walked in and I'm like, wait, what? I'm just no call, no showing, because first of all, I have zero respect for this owner. And secondly, like, she had me fill out a W-2, but still did not pay an hourly wage, which to me was this was the kind of place that would charge you to dry your hair after coloring it. So or if you didn't want to pay for it, they had a blow dry station where you could dry your own hair if you didn't want to pay the $40.
Oh man.
Unreal.
So many red flags. I mean, whenever I hear the word commission, I get triggered. I mean, I just do.
Yeah.
Commission triggers me. 1099 triggers me. But even as Ashley indicated, even if you get a W-2 and you're getting a paycheck, if you're not, as we know from our experiences, if you're not getting a detailed payroll stub stating your hours and that sort of thing, if it's not being paid for on a particular date like it's supposed to be, if your taxes aren't being paid, if you don't have workers' comp, I mean, it just goes on and on and on. There are so many boxes to check when you do have someone working with you.
Is services instead of hours worked. I don't even know how you run that payroll. Like, how do you, what shortcuts do you take? Or this just makes me crazy, and I kind of still want to report this.
Like, I don't buy for a second people are calculating how many, like, keeping track of the services that they're doing. It just is kind of one of those ways where I think when the artist brain and the business brain just can't find a middle ground, like, it really costs us, like, it's just, I just tell people, I'm like, if it wouldn't be acceptable to happen at the Gap, it can't happen in a salon. Like, we don't operate under a different set of labor laws. Like, I truly don't understand that. And then a lot of people are confused about next steps, or they get so burnt out by this experience that they had that they're just like, F it, I'm done. they're usually super traumatized by the time they leave, and they're just like, I just want to move forward, and then nothing ever happens.
And then salons are saying, I can't hire anybody. No, there are no licensed people. So barriers to entry. Or like we talk about, Jamie, in the episode coming out on Monday, is reciprocity is the devil until you can't fill your chairs. And then it's the best thing that's ever happened. So yeah, I would love to see a joint task force between pretty much every state's Board of Cosmetology and Barbering and their Department of Labor. I think that would be just like the raid that happened on the massage parlor at Ryan's friend's, next to Ryan's friend's store. I would just love to see some rude awakenings for people in our industry, because we talked about it when I was in nail school. I was thankful to have a very good instructor, and she said, the board and the Department of Health, they don't want to hear, they told me. Who's they? You know, she was very frank with us. She was like, it's either in the book, it's in the law, or it doesn't exist. And so if you hear they said, that should really like put up some red flags for you.
Well, and the burden at the end of the day falls on the employee that's misclassified, you know,
which is wrong. It's wrong.
Who sometimes don't even know they're misclassified till a pandemic happens and they can't get unemployment, or, you know, they get hit with a $6,000, $10,000 IRS bill.
There's a new bill that might interest you. There's a bill that was introduced by Assemblywoman Lorena Gonzalez, the same woman who introduced AB 5, that would actually impose prison time for wage theft on owners.
Good.
Because think about it. If you steal from your employer, you can go to jail. But somehow employers who steal from their employees don't seem to land in jail. So this is something that's coming up, and I would love to see some test cases.
That makes so much more sense versus what she was pushing last time, which was, you know, the provisions that were in AB 5 that basically said, oh, these people that are already like skirting the law, we're going to depend on them to follow a new law, even though they're already not following the laws that are on the books.
I actually loved AB 5 actually for us, because it took us out of the Borrello portion and said, look, you've got to do these specific things. You have to do all of them, not a preponderance of them or a majority. You have to do all of these things to even qualify for this. And if you don't do this, then, you know, other things apply. But there was a lot of clarification there for us, including that last thing that said that you have to give a 1099 to your salon owner. And it didn't say you have to give a 1099 only if you pay them $600 or more in rent. It said you have to give them a 1099. So that goes even beyond what most people think of as being the baseline requirement for issuing a 1099 to somebody. And that might have been earth-shattering. Actually, I will say that Rachel kindly offered this as a suggestion for an upcoming episode of, you know, what are the next steps? If you realize that you've been misclassified, what do you do as the person who's the victim?
Oh my God, yes. That's amazing. I love that, because yes, unfortunately, the responsibility lies with the owner and the misclassifier, but you're the one who has to. I mean, I remember I had a Nailscape Box subscriber who was in that situation, who was like, well, now what? And I'm thinking, I don't even know. I mean, you know, you're all your clients are there.
But then how do you follow up on it? And then I think a lot of people look at it and they're just like, well, I can't afford to hire a lawyer, so I guess I'll just move on, you know?
Yeah. And that's the problem.
To move on.
The government is supposed to fight for you. You don't need to hire a lawyer. And there are some things that can happen that would be lots of fun even without a lawyer. So we will definitely follow up on that, because we do have some contacts. I don't know if it'll be state level or federal level. I have some contacts that I'm working on. The thing is once this administration changed, things definitely changed, right, in terms of priorities. And so we realize now there is a much greater emphasis on workers' rights, which I am grateful for. And so I think that if we were to secure someone to speak on this now, it would be a different, not completely different, but a slightly different presentation, perhaps with more emphasis on encouraging people to report than it would have been over the last administrations. tenure
I
in
am
office.
curious, what do you think, as far as like just with this booth rent situation that may potentially be up again for discussion, that was part of AB5. Was it AB5?
Well,
Where it's like
AB 1561 is the bill that just gave us being the licensed manicurists in the state of
an
California,
additional 2 years.
an additional 2 years. Right. So that in that additional 2 years, something needs to happen. And I think what first and foremost needs to happen, and I love Ashley's suggestion of a joint task force, but there has to be dialogue. There has to be conversation among the different agencies with all the stakeholders. So that's an excellent recommendation. And I am going to go back to the staffer that I'm connected to, whose boss actually introduced this bill. And I'm going to ask her to consider that, because I think that's the issue, is that because so much information gets filtered, and it's, people are coming at it with their own angle, as we see in other states, even with the New York Nail Salon Accountability Act that Ashley and I have talked about before, where in New York there'd be some really, really strict requirements on nail salons to operate, and only on nail salons, not other establishments that offer nails, but for nail salons only. You would have to be bonded. You would have to submit your payroll records on a monthly basis. In order to even get your license to operate as a nail salon owner, you have to get good reviews from your employees. I mean, it's remarkable what that would require. I don't think we need to go that far, but we need to have the discussion. We need to understand what the issues are and all of the different ways that schools and the board and those of us in the industry all contribute to this problem, either by actively engaging in this kind of behavior or tolerating it.
New York example that Catalina Cruz introduced is a good start. I just don't think it's necessarily realistic for other states, only because when I hear
California's massive.
increased, right, and I think that it's a situation where an increased admin cost is just not something most of those state agencies can even take on, because that someone's got to enforce that, and someone has to look at all that information and compile it and be able to inspect it and refer back to it, and that just freaks me out. But something else that kind of met my notice, and sorry for the wild subject switch, but the FICA tax tip credit is back on the discussion block. The 45B FICA tax tip credit there, PBA is asking us to take action and have it included in the American Jobs Plan, which I thought was interesting, because obviously it didn't make it through on the last COVID relief bill. But for something that has such purported bipartisan support, I'm surprised that we're not hearing more about it. I think it's mostly because people just don't understand what it is.
Mhm.
What? We're supposed to pay taxes on our employees' tips? I thought they were just supposed
I
to
don't
save
have
it in
employees.
pocket.
I have 1099s.
Oh, I've got mixed feelings about this now. And I have always supported this because I've always thought, it should be fair that if you're going to treat restaurants one way, you should treat salons in a similar way. But here's the other thing I've thought about too, in thinking about whether or not in the future I want to eliminate tips completely from my salon business. That would be easier to do if I were working alone. It would only impact me. But when you have employees, it impacts other people beyond just you. And I thought, you know what? In a way, tips are actually subsidizing
Mhm.
the wages of employees, right? I mean, that's part of the compensation. And while you as the salon owner provide the environment in which the service happens, and you've hired this person and you've trained them and they provide the service, it's a subsidy. And if I were to take, for example, my base rate of pay and tack on like 20% what that person earns and say to myself, could I afford to pay my employee $30 to $35 an hour? Well, absolutely not, because they're not busy every single hour any more than every single client tips 20% plus. They just don't all do that. Some clients don't tip at all. Rachel's eyes are getting real big. But
Oh yeah, that's a real easy way to not get back on my schedule.
it's one of those things, Rachel. And if you had been in the industry for a time and had owned a salon and worked with other people and that sort of thing, you would have got this whole I don't tip the owner thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of older clients think like you're the madam of the brothel or something, and we don't tip you. It's like,
Tip the owner. We're the ones that need it.
Yeah, well, who do you
Oh
think
my
is
God,
actually
right?
performing this service? Like, I'm the one performing the service. If you're tipping your service provider, and I happen to be the owner as well, the logic sort of falls apart.
I think what concerns me about when clients don't tip, it's not that, here's the thing, my prices are high enough. Like,
Good.
but my concern is more, am I at the top of your budget? Because if I'm at the top of your budget, are you a dependable client? Like, that's kind of how I see it. Like, in the sense of like, if you have to do a car repair, does that mean you're going to cancel your next 2 months of appointments that you have with me? Like, that's kind of what I think. But I mean, maybe true, maybe not true. It doesn't really happen all that often, so I don't have to think about it all that often. But I'm always thinking, I'm like, okay, like, this is someone who's not tipping. Is she somebody that I should refer to, like a friend who maybe needs more clients that has like a slightly lower price, so that she, you know what I mean? Like, I think in that kind of way.
You're so nice.
I refer a lot. It just, for me, the maintenance is a part of it. So it's the experience. That's my husband.
Hello, husband.
Yeah. Can you, are you going to be able to continue to come in for maintenance? Like, I don't like to be a one and done kind of artist. Like, I want to have a relationship with you and help you reach goals, etc. So I kind of look at it, like, look at the long game a little bit more from like that perspective versus like, can I fill my books right now? And like,
Yeah.
and I actually had to like put a hold on my books for the time being because I needed to make sure that people could rebook appointments. So,
Oh, nice.
yeah,
That's a good problem to have. I think the thing about 45B that maybe we're missing is that if it, not only is it immediate liquidity, when I think salons needed it months ago, but it's never too late, right, to have liquidity as a salon owner. I do think if it passes and people understand it enough to know what it does for their salon, I think it will cut down on a lot of misclassification, because knowing that if you have an employee, you're responsible for half of their employment taxes, workman's compensation, all these other things, plus paying income tax on their tips, it completely removes yet another incentive to properly classify someone. And so if this were to go away, I think we would see a lot less misclassification. Now, I think a lot of that comes back to then the tipped worker conversation, because if restaurants don't have to pay taxes on tips and they're still doing their tipped worker $2.35 an hour BS, that should, I think, coupled with 45B being extended to salon owners, it should also come with removing us from a tipped worker classification across the board federally, so that whatever your state has decided to call you as a salon worker, the federal designation will usurp that. So, but again, that is so many jumps to make. It's to get in a salon owner to understand you're misclassifying, then to understand you should have been paying these taxes, this FICA tax, this whole time, and then to understand how this benefits them. It's like that meme of the woman doing the math. It's like The Beautiful Mind, where she's like, or the Winona Ryder one. Anyway, so many fun things to talk about.
On a plus note, like, this is a very positive note, the email this morning that made me smile was one that showed that I had my entire first PPP loan forgiven. Yay!
Beautiful.
Oh my gosh. And this is after sweating it, because I thought for sure the way that the timing of the shutdowns happened and when we were able to get reopened, that there was no way that I was going to be able to qualify for full forgiveness, because I wouldn't have spent the minimum amount on payroll during the time period. In fact, if it had just shifted a couple of weeks, it would have been no issue whatsoever. But yeah, it was close, but I did the math, and thank goodness for gross wages, and there we have it.
Yay, congrats. That's beautiful news.
That's really good to hear, because I've
Or
been
was it?
really concerned about what's going to happen once people have to pay the piper when it comes to the small businesses.
Yeah, and how much of that's being forgiven, and then how much has been, I don't know, we're notoriously, I think, a bad industry at keeping correct books. So, what kind of fibs are being told about what these things have been spent on. It's kind of funny. But then again,
Mhm.
you look at what's going on in lots of different states with a lot of that PPP loan fraud, and people who are getting things that absolutely should not have been.
Yeah.
Very scary.
Well, there's enough documentation, sort of tying this back to your earlier comments and suggestions for that task force, between the SBA, the IRS, and the unemployment in each of the states, whatever agency's handling unemployment. There is plenty of documentation out there to go after misclassification and fraud.
These can work together when they want to, right? We've just witnessed it. I think it's just they need to be convinced that it's a big enough problem. Because if you were to look at 10 salons, let's say in Chicago, 10 interdisciplinary salons, whether they're just hair or whatever, I would say probably 8 of them are misclassifying their workers.
I think that's being very generous or very conservative. Like, I honestly, and I would say in California, the only way you're going to know that you're not going to someone that's misclassified is if you're going to someone that works alone.
Right.
Like,
It could be misclassifying themselves, honestly,
honestly,
and putting, choosing the incorrect business entity, or just not doing things correctly when it comes to their finances.
my favorite thing is thinking that Venmo isn't tracked.
Matt Gates has taught us anything, it's that Venmo is tracked. Dear God.
Like, it's just like, oh, just Venmo me, but just put a different emoji. It's like, if you have $30,000 coming through on Venmo, I'm sorry. I don't care if you used a hamburger emoji. It's not going to matter. Like,
the emojis don't show up on the 1099K. Sorry. Good Lord. Silliness. Well, this has been a lovely discussion. Thank you for.
I'm happy that you guys did it early. I was like, I'm so happy you posted about it on Instagram too, because I was like drinking my coffee. I was like, oh crap, I gotta get on.
I'm in Michigan with my in-laws, and so we were worried because of the Jamie Salon schedule, and my taking 2 long weekends in a row away from home, that we weren't going to be able to fit things in May. So yeah, hopefully we can schedule them a little bit more in advance so that we can get more and more people on, because I love these discussions. I love all of the insiders are just so smart and dialed in, that these are always like, we've come up with a plan. We're going to fix the whole world.
It just, it just breaks my heart that like things feel so nebulous to so many people in our industry, because truthfully, they're not. Like, it's actually very black and white on many things. But there's just, I mean, I was going back and forth with someone on Instagram, and it's just like, so she's like, so if I process the payments through my Square, but then like, it's just like, just not totally, completely not understanding the difference between like she had her idea of like the difference between a employee and an independent contractor as what payment processor you use. Like, that's, and I'm just like, no. So I hope that we can find a solution that, I mean, at very minimal, just educates the industry.
Well, and people have to want to receive it too. That's the other thing. What we're seeing with SB 803 and the, download this opposition letter, and this flyer has these bullet points that say it's going to outlaw booth rental. What? No, it is not. And people are just taking the stuff at face value. And so when you have these conversations, as you've seen on Instagram, people just don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear that they're wrong. They don't want to hear that they're being taken advantage of, that they're a victim of something, and that they're being wronged to the tune of several $1,000s. They're just like, I'd rather not know. And it's unfortunate.
I just don't know how like if people are, when people are being misclassified, they're getting like, you know, they're thinking, okay, well, I can write off so much. It's like, well, if you don't have overhead, or if you're not, you know, a business in which you're driving long distances, like, you know, like freelance, like set work, like when I did makeup or whatever, you know, it's like I had car mileage, I could write off my car, I could write off so much stuff. And it's just like when you're walking into a salon and an employee, like, what do you even have to write off? Like, you're going to be hit with this whole bill. Like, you have a big goose egg. You can't write anything off.
It's super important. I think they've all been sold this bill of goods that, oh, you don't have to pay taxes if I 1099 you as a salon owner. And that is just so not true. And like you said, you get hit with this huge tax bill because the IRS knows, they know how much you're supposed to pay. And they're like, yeah, cool. Give me my money.
And you can only work backwards for so long and like fudge your write-offs for so long. You can't operate in a deficit for, you know, an extended period of time. It's just.
Yeah, because then it's not a business, it's a hobby.
Everyone's going to get a reset from COVID though. You know,
that's what I was hoping. Honestly, I was very surprised that, like, to hear that salons that I thought were reputable out here, you know, were kind of flim-flamming between offering an hourly wage, then if that gets turned down, then going to commission. You know, I'm just like, what? Just offer an hourly wage and commission. Like, you can do both.
And how many big name salons are no longer salons because of huge class action settlements?
That's a fun one.
I think I'll have some orange juice now.
Yeah, it's at the point where I'm more surprised to hear a salon is doing fair labor practices than that they're not.
Oh, that's absolutely
conversation.
True,
yes, it's a huge conversation everywhere.
Yeah, we know most would fail an audit, and when you could get audited by a number of different agencies, it's not just one. Like, I think when people hear the word audit, they immediately think of IRS, like they think of their taxes, but that's just one kind of audit that can get done in a salon space. So, you know, maybe that's one of those things that we will discuss in a future
and these
episode.
Other departments, they're not beholden to BBC fees.
No.
Oh no.
They can go back
10,000, 20,000.
I wish they would hit more often and more publicly, because I think that's one of the things that's been, you know, it's obvious that people aren't learning their lesson individually and they're not seeing other people penalized. So if we could see more of the penalties happening and more made of that publicly, I think they could accomplish quite a bit. Name and shame. Let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. All right, friends. Well, thank you for another fabulous hour of conversation. And like I said, we've solved the world's problems, so we can move forward into the weekend knowing we've done what we can. But I appreciate you both, and thanks for your time. And let's do it again soon.
Yeah.
Excellent.
All right,
Thank you.
Ladies.
Enjoy your weekend.
Thanks. See ya.
Bye-bye.